My name is Clara Ashford. I'm 33 years old. And for the last 7 of them, I've been married to Julian Ashford. The Christmas dinner table was set perfectly. The scent of roasted turkey, the one I had woken up at 5:00 inches the morning to prepare, filled the air. The candles flickered, casting a warm, golden glow on the faces of my husband's family. It all looked like a postcard, a perfect holiday scene. But it wasn't. It was an execution, and I was the one on the chopping block. I stood at the head of the table, the electric carving knife humming in my hand. I sliced through the crisp brown skin of the turkey, each movement precise and calm. Across from me, my mother-in-law, Eleanor Ashford, beamed. But she wasn't looking at me. Her smile was aimed at a woman sitting to my husband's right. A woman named Sophie Prescott. "Sophie is just a marvel," Eleanor announced to the table, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "A top graduate from Yale Law. She's an attorney. You know, Julian has always needed someone with that kind of drive. A true partner to build an empire with." Julian shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on his wine glass. "He wouldn't look at me," Eleanor continued, her words like carefully aimed darts. "And her family, the Prescotts, are just wonderful people. So established. Plus," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, though it was loud enough for everyone to hear, "she wants a big family. 4 children. Isn't that right, dear?" Sophie, polished and perfect in a silk blouse, gave a tight, practiced smile. "That's the plan." My sister-in-law, Beatrice, smirked from across the table. "See, Julian, a solution. A solution to the Clara problem. The problem of me, the artist, the quiet wife who didn't produce heirs or business connections." I placed a perfect slice of white meat onto a platter. My hand didn't shake. My smile didn't falter. I met Eleanor's triumphant gaze, holding it for a long moment. I let her think she was winning. I let her enjoy her little public ambush. She had no idea that I knew. She had no idea that for the past 6 months I had known everything. She didn't know about the tiny discreet recording device I carried in my purse, or the app on my phone that was even at that very moment capturing every single one of her poisonous words. She thought she was planning my replacement. She had no idea she was handing me my freedom. The Ashford family home was a stage, and for 10 years, Eleanor had been its sole director. 7 of those years I had been her son's wife, and for all of them I had been cast in a role I never auditioned for. The inadequate daughter-in-law. I was the soft-spoken, agreeable wife. The artist whose life's work was casually dismissed as a quaint hobby. I was the woman who was good enough to steady Julian through his turbulent 20 seconds. But not ambitious enough. Not connected enough. Not fertile enough to carry the Ashford name into the next generation. It was a role I had slowly, painfully come to understand. When I met Julian in a crowded university library, he wasn't an Ashford scion. He was just a man with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to see the real me. He loved my art. Or so he claimed. I remember our third date. I took him to my tiny, chaotic studio apartment. Paint splattered the floorboards. Canvases leaned against every wall, and the air smelled of turpentine and potential. I was sure the mess would scare him off. Instead, he walked through the room with a look of reverence, gently touching the edge of a half-finished canvas. "This is incredible, Clara," he'd whispered, looking at me. "Not the painting. You're a creator. It's like magic." He made me feel seen, not for who I could be or what I could offer, but for exactly who I was. We fell in love over cheap coffee and shared dreams of a life we would build together. A life defined by his business sense and my art, far from the suffocating influence of his overbearing mother in Connecticut. But the pull of family money is a gravitational force few can escape. After graduation, the promise of a position at his father's investment firm was too lucrative to ignore. The move back to his hometown was supposed to be temporary, just until he made his own mark. But the years slipped by, and the man I fell in love with was slowly sanded down, reshaped and polished into the son Eleanor always wanted. Our life wasn't ours. It became a satellite trapped in a decaying orbit around the massive, unyielding planet of the Ashford family. Eleanor's disapproval was never a secret. It was a constant low-level hum in the background of my marriage, a form of emotional tinnitus. One of my first major gallery showings was in the city. I was ecstatic, terrified, and so proud. Julian had been supportive, helping me hang the pieces. But then Eleanor and Beatrice arrived. Eleanor swept through the gallery, her eyes scanning the room. "Not my paintings?" "Oh, it's very colorful, dear," she'd said, her gaze landing on a large abstract piece I'd poured my soul into for months. She'd turned to one of her friends and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "It's a lovely hobby, but I do wish she'd apply herself to something more substantial, like the charity board." The compliment was a Trojan horse, smuggling the insult deep inside. My greatest professional achievement reduced to a hobby. Julian had squeezed my hand under the table that night, muttering, "Don't listen to her." But he never said it to her. He never defended me where it mattered. His support only existed in the quiet spaces where his mother couldn't hear. Tonight, the low hum had become a roar. Sophie Prescott was the physical embodiment of everything I was not. She was a lawyer, a profession Eleanor respected for its tangible monetary value. She came from a wealthy, connected family, the kind of people the Ashfords considered peers. And she wanted children. 4 of them. The perfect number of heirs to inherit the family name and dilute my memory. As I took my seat at the table, the superficial chatter was almost deafening. Beatrice was describing her recent ski trip to Aspen, her voice loud and grating. Arthur, my father-in-law, was asking Julian about market trends. Arthur was a quiet man, a ghost in his own home, completely overshadowed by his wife's booming personality. He was kind to me in small, almost unnoticeable ways. He'd remember the name of my favorite author and leave a book by my bedside table. Or he'd quietly compliment a new painting. But he was a man who valued peace above all else. And in the Ashford household, Peace meant letting Eleanor have her way. His silence was his complicity. A choice he made every single day. I took a bite of the stuffing I'd made from my grandmother's recipe. It tasted like ash in my mouth. I decided it was time to join the performance. I turned to our guest of honor, arranging my features into a polite, welcoming smile. "It's so lovely to finally meet you, Sophie," I said, my voice perfectly even and calm. "Eleanor has told us so much about you." Sophie, who had been basking in the attention, seemed momentarily startled to be addressed by me directly. The wife? The obstacle. "Oh. It's nice to meet you, too. Clara." "An attorney," Eleanor said. "That's very impressive," I continued, keeping my tone light. "Which firm are you with?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated, her perfect smile faltering for just a second. I work for Henderson and Associates." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Henderson and Associates? I don't think I've heard of them. What's their specialty now?" It was Eleanor's turn to look nervous. She jumped in, a false brightness in her voice. "Oh. Clara. Let's not bore everyone with shop talk. Arthur, tell Sophie about the new boat." But I kept my eyes on Sophie, my polite smile unwavering. The rest of the table had gone quiet, sensing a shift in the air. This was no longer an ambush. It was a standoff. Sophie's eyes flickered toward Julian, then back to me. She took a small sip of water, a tiny, nervous gesture. She swallowed. "We're a boutique firm," she said, her voice a little strained. "We specialize in family law." "Family law," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us like smoke. "How fascinating." I paused, letting her feel the weight of the moment before adding the final devastating touch. Divorce, custody battles, that sort of thing. The color drained from Sophie's face. She knew in that instant that I understood exactly why she was here. I wasn't just the wife. I was the case she was being prepped to handle. The room was silent, save for the faint crackling of the candles on the table. Eleanor glared at me, her mask of holiday cheer finally slipping to reveal the cold, hard fury beneath. The perfect Christmas dinner had just begun, and the guest of honor had just been exposed as the person hired to tear it all apart. The silence that followed my question was thick and heavy, charged with unspoken truths. It was a silence that confirmed everything. Julian was staring at his half-eaten turkey as if it held the secrets to the universe, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. Beatrice shot me a look of pure venom, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Arthur adjusted his tie, a nervous habit I knew meant he was deeply uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. And Eleanor. Eleanor looked at me as if I had just thrown a glass of wine in her face, which metaphorically I had. But it was Sophie's reaction that held my attention. She was a deer in the headlights, a pawn in a game she was only just beginning to comprehend. Eleanor had brought her here not as a potential daughter-in-law, but as a weapon. A beautiful Yale-educated weapon to be wielded against me. As a lawyer, She was used to being in control, to having all the facts, and the dawning realization that she had been manipulated, that she was sitting at a dinner table under entirely false pretenses, was written all over her face. Her professional composure was a thin veneer over a growing sense of humiliation. Eleanor, never one to be defeated, was the first to recover. She forced a laugh, a brittle, sharp sound that shattered the tense quiet. "Oh, Clara, you have such a dramatic imagination. Sophie is here as a friend of the family. We simply admire her impressive career." She then launched into a monologue, a desperate attempt to repaint the evening in respectable colors. She went on and on about Sophie's impeccable lineage. "The Prescotts are one of the founding families of this town," she boasted, gesturing with her wine glass. "They have a legacy. They understand the importance of family, of building something that lasts. They value tradition." Every word was a carefully crafted insult aimed directly at me. My family wasn't local. My parents were retired teachers who lived a quiet, humble life in Oregon. We didn't have a legacy. We had a loving, normal family. In Eleanor's world, that was the same as having nothing. I felt the old familiar sting of her judgment. For years, I had let it make me feel small. But tonight was different. Tonight, her words were just noise. The desperate buzzing of an insect trapped in a jar. I let her finish her performance. I took another sip of my wine, savoring the crisp, cold liquid. Then I turned to her with an air of innocent curiosity. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor. A legacy is important. That's why Julian and I were so careful when we drafted our prenuptial agreement." The word prenup landed on the dinner table like a grenade. Julian's head shot up. His eyes for the first time that night met mine. They were wide with pure panic. He knew exactly what was coming. Eleanor's smile froze on her face. Her perfectly manicured hand paused on its way to her wine glass. "A prenup? That's a private matter, Clara. Not appropriate for the dinner table." "Oh, of course," I said, my voice still light and conversational. "Forgive me. But you were just talking about building things that last." We felt the same way. We wanted to make sure our marriage was built on love, not on finances. So, we agreed very amicably to keep all of our premarital assets completely separate. What's his is his and what's mine is mine. It's very simple. Really? It protects the integrity of the marriage. Silence fell over the table once more. This time it was even heavier than before. Sophie's face, which had been pale, was now ashen. Her eyes darted from Eleanor to Julian and back again. A flicker of anger, of professional and personal betrayal crossed her features. It was clear this was a crucial piece of information Eleanor had conveniently omitted during her sales pitch. Sophie, the savvy divorce attorney, had walked into a deposition without all the discovery documents. She had been made a fool. Her posture stiffened. She was no longer a potential love interest. She was a lawyer evaluating a case that was falling apart. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. A frantic bird-like gesture. trying to regain control. That's just a piece of paper. It hardly matters. Julian has built considerable wealth during your marriage. He's a full partner at the firm now. It was a lie. A blatant, easily disproven lie. And it was the opening I had been waiting for. A partner? I asked, turning to my husband. My voice filled with a convincing wifely pride. That's wonderful news. Julian. When did that happen? You didn't tell me? I placed my hand on his arm. He flinched ever so slightly. We must celebrate. Julian squirmed in his chair. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked to his mother for a lifeline, but she was too busy glaring at me. He was drowning, and his mother had just pushed his head under the water. I continued, my tone dripping with false sympathy. As far as I knew, you were still in the same senior associate position you've held for the past 5 years. It's a wonderful job. Of course. So stable. But partner. That's a huge step up. Your father must be so proud. I glanced at Arthur, who was now studying the pattern on his plate with intense interest. The implication was clear to everyone at the table. Julian wasn't the financial powerhouse his mother was pretending he was. He was a man in his mid-30s, still working for his father, still in the same role he'd been in for half a decade. The empire Eleanor spoke of was a fantasy, a projection of her own insatiable ambitions. Beatrice, ever the loyal soldier, jumped to her mother's defense. Julian is dedicated to the family business. He has responsibilities you couldn't possibly understand. He's not some flighty artist who sells a painting every now and then for pocket money. You're right. He's not an artist. I agreed calmly, looking directly at her. He's an employee of his father's firm. I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the next blow. I wasn't just undermining their narrative. I was systematically dismantling it brick by brick. And I was just getting started. The foundation of their lies was about to crumble. And the truth about the very house they were sitting in was next. The air in the dining room was thick with resentment. Eleanor's carefully orchestrated evening was unraveling thread by thread. And she was furious. She had intended for me to be the one humiliated, the one cast aside in favor of a newer, better model. Instead, I had turned the tables on her, using nothing but simple, undeniable facts. The conversation had stalled completely. No one seemed to know what to say. The clinking of silverware against china was the only sound. Each scrape and tap amplified in the tense quiet. Julian was now drinking his wine in long, desperate gulps, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame. He was a puppet whose strings had been cut, collapsing in on himself in his high-backed chair. I knew I had to keep the momentum going. I had their undivided attention. It was time to pull another, much larger brick from their crumbling wall of lies. I decided to address the unspoken centerpiece of their whole plan. This house. The beautiful, sprawling colonial where we sat. The home Eleanor assumed was part of the Ashford family portfolio. The home she was so graciously, implicitly offering to Sophie. I turned to Eleanor. My expression, one of polite concern. Eleanor. You've redecorated the upstairs guest room. Haven't you? The wallpaper is new. She was momentarily thrown by the mundane change of subject. Yes, she said. Her voice clipped. I had it done last month. The old paper was so drab. It's lovely, I said sincerely. You have wonderful taste. But you really should have asked me first. Her eyes narrowed. Asked you? Why on earth would I need to ask you? Clara, this is my son's house. It was the statement I had been waiting for. The foundational lie they had all been operating under. The lie Julian had allowed and perhaps even encouraged them to believe. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. I set the glass down gently on the white linen tablecloth. No, Eleanor, I said, my voice quiet but firm, carrying to every corner of the silent room. It's not. This house isn't Julian's. It's mine. You could have heard a pin drop. Eleanor stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Arthur froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Beatrice looked from her mother to me, a confused scowl on her face. Sophie's eyes widened. She leaned forward ever so slightly, the lawyer in her reevaluating every asset in the case. I inherited this house from my grandmother, Marion, 2 years before Julian and I were married. I explained calmly. As we've already established, our prenup keeps premarital assets completely separate. This house belongs to me solely and completely. I could still remember my grandmother, her hands smelling of soil from her garden, telling me, this house is a safe harbor. Clara. A place that is always yours. Don't ever let a man make you feel like a guest in your own life. I hadn't understood the weight of her words then. I did now. Evelyn sputtered, finding her voice. That's ridiculous. Julian pays the mortgage. He told me so himself. There is no mortgage, I said smoothly. My grandmother left it to me free and clear. Julian doesn't pay a mortgage. He pays me rent. The shock on their faces was a small, bitter victory. It was a truth I had kept hidden for years, a secret between Julian and me. I remembered the conversation clearly. We were newly engaged, sitting in this very kitchen. I can't have my family thinking I'm living off you, he had said, his face tight with insecurity. It's a pride thing. Let's just tell them I'm covering the mortgage. I'll transfer you the money every month. It will be our secret. I had agreed, wanting to protect his fragile ego, thinking it was a harmless lie that made him feel better. I never imagined he would use that lie as a foundation to build my replacement's future on. Beatrice scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. You charge your own husband rent. How pathetic. It was his idea. Actually, I replied, looking directly at Julian. His eyes were pleading with me to stop, but I was done protecting him. He said it was important for him to feel like he was contributing to keep his pride. He was very insistent. I was just respecting his wishes. The jab hit its mark. Julian visibly flinched. His pride was the very thing I was now stripping away from him in front of his entire family and the woman they'd chosen to replace me. He had allowed his mother to orchestrate this coup, to treat me with such profound disrespect in the home my grandmother had gifted me. He didn't deserve my protection anymore. He sat there, trapped and exposed, drinking his wine like it was water. The shame in his eyes was a bitter pill, and I was making him swallow it. He had made his choice, siding with his mother through his silence. And now he was facing the consequences. The house he had pretended was his, the life he had built on a foundation of my assets, was all coming into question. And the replacement wife, the brilliant attorney sitting beside him, was watching her potential divorce case evaporate before her very eyes. The Ashfords didn't have the assets she had been led to believe. The biggest one of all belonged to the woman they were trying to throw away. Despite the bombshells I had dropped, Eleanor was not one to surrender. She was like a general refusing to admit the battle was lost. Even as her flanks were collapsing, her strategy simply shifted. If she couldn't attack me on financial grounds, she would attack me on a more personal, more painful front. My body. My perceived failure as a woman. She ignored the conversation about the house as if it had never happened. She turned her attention back to Sophie. Her voice once again syrupy sweet, but this time with a sharp, desperate edge. Well, a house is just a house. Bricks and mortar. What truly matters is building a family. A real family. She placed a proprietary hand on Sophie's arm. Sophie understands that. She's young. She's healthy. She can give Julian the children he deserves. It was a direct, brutal blow. My struggles with infertility weren't a secret, but they were a private grief. Julian and I had been through 3 rounds of IVF. A gauntlet of hope and despair. I remembered the nights I'd cried myself to sleep after another negative test. The feeling of my own body betraying me. Julian had been supportive at first, holding my hand during appointments, telling me it didn't matter. But over time, his support had curdled into a quiet resentment. Another failure he could lay at my feet. Now his mother was taking that private pain and turning it into a public spectacle. She was reducing my worth as a woman, as a wife, to the function of my womb. And she was presenting Sophie as my fertile, upgraded replacement. Sophie looked deeply uncomfortable. This was clearly more than she had bargained for. She was a divorce attorney, used to conflict and high emotions. But this was a raw, intimate cruelty she seemed unprepared for. She tried to gently pull her arm away from Eleanor's grasp. But my mother-in-law held firm, using her as a prop in her twisted drama. I refused to let them see my pain. I would not give them the satisfaction of my tears. I had cried enough over this issue in the dark. I would not cry for them in the light. Instead, I leaned into the absurdity of it all. I gave Sophie a warm conspiratorial smile. Eleanor is right. Sophie, I said. My voice filled with a fake brightness that grated on the tense atmosphere. A house is just a house. But since we're in my house, perhaps you'd like a tour after dinner. I could show you my art studio. It has the most wonderful northern light. It's my favorite room. The phrase "my house" hung in the air, a deliberate reminder of the truth I had just revealed. Sophie looked utterly bewildered. "Your house?" she repeated, looking directly at Eleanor for an explanation. You told me this was Julian's childhood home." Another lie exposed. Eleanor's face tightened. "I may have simplified things to avoid confusion," she muttered, her voice low. "Oh, there's no confusion," I said cheerfully. "It's very simple. My grandmother grew up down the street. She adored this neighborhood. She bought this place when the original owners, the Hendersons, passed away. I spent my summers here as a child, learning to paint in what is now my studio. It has a lot of history for my family." I paused, then looked at Julian. Julian's family home is that lovely Tudor across town. A beautiful property. Perhaps you should host Christmas there next year, Eleanor. It would be far less complicated. The tension in the room was now so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sophie was finally seeing the full, unvarnished picture. She hadn't been invited to dinner as a prospective bride. She had been cast in a play without ever seeing the script. She was a pawn, and she knew it. The look in her eyes shifted from confusion to a cold, simmering anger. It was aimed not at me, but at Eleanor and Julian. She had been professionally and personally compromised. Eleanor, sensing she was losing her new ally, doubled down in a desperate flurry of praise. She talked about Sophie's connections, her ambition, her suitability as an Ashford wife, the perfect mother for Julian's future children. She was building a fantasy, a perfect life for Julian and Sophie right in front of me. But the foundation was cracked. The lies had been exposed. Every word she spoke now sounded hollow and desperate. She was no longer undermining me. She was undermining herself. She was revealing herself to be a manipulative, cruel woman willing to exploit anyone to get what she wanted. And the target of her current praise, Sophie, was seeing it all with the sharp, analytical eyes of a lawyer evaluating a character witness. The replacement plan wasn't just failing. It was backfiring spectacularly. The dinner was a train wreck in slow motion. The food I had so carefully prepared, the rosemary-scented potatoes, the honey-glazed carrots sat largely untouched. The festive atmosphere had curdled into a thick soup of resentment and hostility. Julian had refilled his wineglass so many times I had lost count. He was retreating into a drunken haze, the only escape he could find from the mess he had helped create. Eleanor, however, was relentless. She continued her campaign, ignoring the awkward silences and the daggers I was throwing with my eyes. She had moved on to planning Julian and Sophie's hypothetical future. "You'd love the summer home in the Hamptons, Sophie. It's perfect for children. So much space to run around on the beach." It was time to expose more than just their lies. It was time to expose Julian. I had been protecting him for years, covering for his weaknesses, his insecurities, his indiscretions. No more. The discovery that had started my 6-month surveillance campaign was his biggest betrayal. And it was time to bring it into the light. It had been a Tuesday afternoon. I was looking for a bank statement to give to our accountant. Julian was usually so organized, but a pile of mail was sitting on his desk. A letter from a credit card company I didn't recognize had fallen to the floor. I picked it up. It was addressed only to him. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The charges were for hotel rooms at the Ritz-Carlton. Expensive dinners for two. Jewelry from Tiffany's. All on dates. He was supposedly at business conferences. The pain was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a secret life. That was the day the quiet, accommodating Clara began to die. I cleared my throat, and the table fell silent again. They were all waiting for my next move. Speaking of travel, I began, my tone casual. Julian has been doing so much of it lately. All those business conferences. He must be exhausted. I looked at my husband. How was the Ritz-Carlton in the city last month? Darling, did you manage to close that big deal? Julian froze. His wine glass halfway to his lips. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He knew exactly what I was talking about. It wasn't a conference. It was a weekend with another woman. Eleanor jumped in, trying to run interference. Julian works harder than anyone I know. He needs a comfortable place to stay when he's on the road. Oh. I agree completely. I said comfort is so important. And he's been looking for something more permanent. Hasn't he? Julian? Something in the city? I didn't need to say more. The mention of his browser history, which I had stumbled upon one evening, filled with searches for one-bedroom apartment rentals near a woman's name I didn't recognize, hung in the air between us. He knew that I knew. He stared at me, his face pale and clammy. Clara. Don't. It was a whisper. A desperate plea from a cornered animal. But I was done being silent. I was done protecting him. Eleanor, finally realizing the new direction of my attack, went for the jugular. Her face was contorted in a mask of rage. You have no right to question him, she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. You who have failed him in the most fundamental way. He worked so hard. And what has he come home to? An empty house? An empty nursery? You couldn't even give him a child. You're barren. The word echoed in the silent room. Barren. It was the cruelest thing she could have said. The deepest cut she could have made. It was a word that had haunted my loneliest nights. A word whispered by doctors and confirmed by cold clinical tests. For a moment, the air left my lungs. The pain was sharp. Physical. I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had finally broken me. But then something inside me hardened. The pain turned to steel. I had grieved that loss. I had made my peace with it. She could not use it to shame me. Not anymore. I looked her directly in the eye. My voice low and steady, devoid of any emotion except a cold, hard finality. You're wrong, Eleanor, I said. I let the statement hang in the air, watching the confusion on their faces. Then I delivered the final devastating truth. I'm not barren. I made a choice. I chose not to bring a child into this family. I chose not to have children with a man who lies and cheats. I chose not to have children with a man whose mother auditions replacements for his wife at Christmas dinner. The silence that followed was absolute. I had taken her cruelest weapon and turned it against her son. I had reframed my perceived failure into a deliberate, conscious choice. A choice to protect any potential child from this toxic, heartless family. A choice to protect myself. Julian looked as if I had physically struck him. The last of his defenses crumbled. He had nothing left. I had exposed his lies, his infidelity, and now I had rejected him in the most profound way possible. Eleanor was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had played her last, most vicious card, and it had been trumped. The cracks in the Ashford family facade had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The illusion of a happy family Christmas was gone, shattered on the floor like a dropped ornament. All that remained was the raw, ugly truth exposed under the warm glow of the holiday candles. Eleanor was sputtering, trying to form a coherent sentence, but her rage had rendered her speechless. Beatrice was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and a new grudging disbelief. Julian looked utterly broken, a hollowed-out version of the man I once loved. I decided it was time to end the charade for good, to show them just how badly they had underestimated me. You know, Eleanor, I began, my voice calm and measured. You really should be more careful about what you discuss on the phone and in your son's office. You never know who might be listening. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of fear replacing the anger. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the phone call you made to Beatrice last week, I said, my gaze shifting to my sister-in-law, who immediately looked down at her lap. The one where you referred to me as the Clara problem. You said, and I quote, "She's a lovely girl, but she offers us nothing. We need to cut our losses and find someone who can build the family's future, not just paint pictures of it." You then laid out your entire plan to introduce Julian to a more suitable wife after the holidays. The color drained from Eleanor's face. She looked at Beatrice, who refused to meet her gaze. How? How could you possibly know that? And I'm talking about the conversation you had with Julian in his office 2 months ago. I continued, my gaze shifting to my husband. I believe your words were, you need to secure your financial independence from her before you make a move. Open a separate account. Start building a nest egg. Don't be a fool. Julian. You coached him on how to hide his assets from me. Julian stopped breathing. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost satisfying to witness. He knew it was all true. I know all of it, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than all of Eleanor's shouting. Because for the last 6 months, since the day I found that credit card statement, I have recorded everything. Every phone call, every meeting, every single lie. The final bombshell had been dropped. The room was utterly still. I could see the wheels turning in their heads as the full implication of my words sank in. I wasn't just making accusations. I had proof. I had an arsenal. I remembered the day I'd met with Diana. A lawyer a friend had recommended. I had sat in her sleek, minimalist office, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. Diana hadn't judged me. She'd listened patiently, then said, "In this state, you only need one-party consent to record a conversation you are a part of. But for conversations you are not a part of, it's illegal. Be careful. Focus on documenting financial records, emails, anything in writing. Let their arrogance be their undoing." And it was. The recordings were just the icing on the cake of financial documents, emails, and credit card statements I had been meticulously collecting. Eleanor went pale, a sickly greenish-white color. The powerful, untouchable matriarch looked small and fragile. Her carefully constructed world built on secrets and manipulation had been brought down. She saw me as a quiet, artistic, weak woman. She never imagined I could be strategic. She never imagined I would fight back. "You're lying," she whispered. But her voice lacked all conviction. "Am I?" I asked. I reached into my purse, which was sitting on the empty chair beside me, and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened a folder labeled simply "Evidence." I didn't have to play anything. The gesture was enough. They knew I wasn't bluffing. I stood up from the table, my movement slow and deliberate. I have spent the last 6 months of my life being a ghost in my own marriage. I have listened to your family plot my removal. I have listened to you call me a problem, a failure, an inconvenience. I have listened to my husband agree with you. I have listened to you plan my replacement. I looked at each of them in turn, letting my words sink in. And while you were all busy plotting, I was busy making my own plans. I looked at Julian, at the man whose betrayal had been a slow, creeping poison. I have already contacted my attorney, I said, my voice clear and strong. Her name is Diana. She's very good, and she will be filing the divorce papers first thing Monday morning, along with a full accounting of the marital assets you've attempted to hide. The finality of it hung in the air. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. The marriage was over. The game was over. I had won. Not by being louder or crueler, but by being smarter, by listening, by waiting, and by choosing the perfect moment to reveal the truth. The Christmas dinner they had designed to destroy me had become the stage for my liberation. My announcement acted like a lit match in a room full of gasoline. The quiet shock erupted into a cacophony of panicked, angry voices. Julian was the first to find his. "Clara? Wait," he sputtered, stumbling to his feet and knocking his chair back. "We can talk about this. You don't have to do this. This is a mistake." He sounded pathetic, like a child who had been caught cheating on a test and was now begging the teacher not to call his parents. Eleanor, however, went straight to rage, her voice a shrill, piercing shriek. "How dare you? How dare you threaten us in this house? You come into this family. You take my son's home. You give him nothing, and now you try to destroy us. You will regret this for the rest of your miserable, childless life." Beatrice chimed in with her usual brand of mockery, though it now sounded forced and hollow. "Oh, look at her." Little Clara finally grew a backbone. "It's pathetic. Running to a lawyer like a coward." But then the unexpected happened. Arthur Ashford, the quiet, passive man at the end of the table, slammed his fist down on the mahogany surface. The crystal glasses jumped, and a splash of red wine spilled onto the white tablecloth like a spreading stain. "Enough!" he roared. The room fell silent. In the 10 years I had known him, I had never heard Arthur raise his voice. He commanded the room with a sudden, shocking authority that his wife's constant shrieking could never achieve. Eleanor, Julian, and Beatrice all stared at him, stunned into silence. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his face grim and etched with a deep, weary sadness. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at the empty chair where Sophie Prescott had been sitting. "Miss Prescott," he said, his voice heavy with regret, though she was long gone. "On behalf of myself, I apologize. You were brought into this house under false pretenses. My wife and my son have used you in a manner that is both dishonorable and cruel. You do not deserve to be a part of this mess." He then turned his gaze on Eleanor. The look he gave his wife of over 40 years was one I had never seen before. It was filled with a deep, profound disappointment. "This was your doing, Eleanor. This whole disgusting spectacle. You were so obsessed with your own ambitions, your own idea of what this family should be, that you were willing to destroy your son's marriage. And for what? So you could play matchmaker? So you could swap one daughter-in-law for another like she was a piece of furniture?" He shook his head slowly. "I have stayed silent for too long. I have watched you belittle Clara, dismiss her work, and wound her in ways you can't even comprehend. I have let you run this family with your manipulations and your cruelty. That ends tonight." He finally looked at his son, and there was no pity in his eyes, only shame. "And you, Julian, you let her do it. You stood by and said nothing. A man protects his wife. What kind of man have you become?" The family had turned on itself. The united front of the Ashford family was a thing of the past, fractured beyond repair right there at the Christmas dinner table. With the family now locked in their own internal conflict, all eyes turned back to me. I had remained standing, a calm island in the middle of their storm. I had said everything I needed to say. There was nothing left but to leave. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice cutting through their tense silence. "I'm done being humiliated. I'm done being your problem. I'm done with all of you." Eleanor, her face pale and her eyes wild, lunged forward. "You're not done. You're nothing without this family. You're a failed artist with no prospects. Where will you go? What will you do? You'll come crawling back." Her words were a desperate last-ditch attempt to wound me, to reassert her dominance, to make me feel small and helpless. But her insults had lost their power. They were the meaningless ramblings of a defeated woman. It was Arthur who answered her. "She'll be fine, Eleanor," he said. his voice weary but firm. Clara is stronger than you ever gave her credit for. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. She deserved better than what she got here. She deserved better than us. He then looked at me, a genuine sadness in his eyes. Clara, if you need a place to go, the Hamptons property is empty for the winter. You're welcome to it for as long as you need. A safe place. No one will bother you there. It was a surprising and touching offer. It was an acknowledgement of my pain. A gesture of kindness in a house that had shown me so little of it. It was his way of atoning for years of silent complicity. Thank you, Arthur, I said. And I meant it. But that won't be necessary. I've already made arrangements. I walked to the hallway and took my coat from the antique brass hook by the door. As I slipped it on, Julian rushed over to me. His face a mask of desperation and drunken confusion. Clara, please, he begged, his voice slurring slightly as he reached for my arm. Don't leave. We can fix this. I love you. It was my mother. She got in my head. I pulled my arm away, disgusted by his weakness, his refusal to take any responsibility. I looked at him, at the man I had shared my life with for a decade, and I felt nothing. The love had been corroded by years of disrespect and finally killed by his ultimate betrayal. No, you don't, I said, my voice devoid of anger or sadness. It was just a statement of fact. You don't love me. You loved the comfort I provided. You loved that I was easy, that I didn't challenge you. You loved that I made you feel like a big man in my house while you secretly plotted to leave me. But you don't love me. If you did, none of this would have ever happened. I turned my back on him and walked to the front door. Eleanor was still screaming something about how I would come crawling back. But her voice was just noise, the distant sound of a storm that had already passed. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the cold December air. The night was crisp and silent. Snow was beginning to fall. Soft white flakes dusting the perfectly manicured lawn. It felt like the world was being washed clean. I took a deep, cleansing breath, filling my lungs with the cold, pure air. I didn't look back. My freedom was waiting. I walked out into the Christmas night. The sound of the Ashfords' front door closing behind me with a quiet, satisfying click. I didn't run. I walked calmly down the stone pathway to my car, the snowflakes melting on my hair and coat. The world seemed muffled and peaceful. Inside my purse, my phone began to buzz. First, a text from Julian. Clara? Please come back. We need to talk. Then one from Eleanor. You have made a terrible mistake. I silenced the phone without looking at anymore. Their voices, which had dictated so much of my life and my happiness, no longer mattered. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, leaving the house with its perfect holiday decorations and its rotten core behind me. I didn't cry. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet stillness I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I hadn't even realized I was carrying, being lifted from my shoulders. I drove for a while, just watching the snowfall, the city lights blurring through my windshield. Then I pulled over on a quiet side street, took out my phone, and made a call. "Diana?" I said when my lawyer answered, her voice sharp and alert even late on Christmas Day. "Clara?" she said. "Is everything all right? Did it happen?" "Everything is perfect," I replied, a small smile touching my lips for the first time that night. "It happened. File the papers Monday morning. Consider it done," she said. There was a pause and then she added, "I'm proud of you. Now go take care of yourself. And Merry Christmas, Clara." "Merry Christmas, Diana," I said and ended the call. I didn't go to a hotel or a friend's house. I drove to the one place that had always been my sanctuary. The small house my grandmother had left me. The one I had rented out for years, but had kept in perfect condition between tenants. It was my true home, filled with her memory. The scent of old books and lemon polish, with my dusty art supplies stored in the attic. With peace. I let myself in, turned on the lights, and dropped my keys on the small wooden table by the door. The house was quiet and welcoming. It felt like an embrace. I went to the kitchen, found an unopened bottle of champagne a tenant had left as a thank you gift, and popped the cork. I stood by the large picture window in the living room, a place where my grandmother and I used to sit and watch the seasons change. I looked out at the snow blanketing the world in a pristine layer of white, and I raised my glass. I wasn't toasting to revenge. Revenge felt small and bitter. I was toasting to the truth, to my own strength, to a future that was finally completely mine to create. Sometimes the best Christmas gift isn't what you get under the tree. It's what you finally let go of. Sometimes the best Christmas gift isn't about being surrounded by family. It's about finding your freedom. If this story touched you, or if you've ever felt replaced, dismissed, or underestimated, please drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. And if you'd like to support me and help me grow, please consider